At the Women's Pavilion of Methodist Hospital in Germantown, a group of expectant grandparents gathers for a 2-hour class called the Grandparent Connection. Registered nurse Cathy Akin is the class instructor. With her help, these grandparents-to-be will be ready to welcome a new family member. For many of these expectant grandparents, it will have been 20 or 30 years since they've cared for a baby. So the class begins with the basics. Things like the proper way to hold a newborn, the correct way to swaddle the baby, and of course, changing diapers. New technologies such as modern car seats and baby monitors are discussed. A significant portion of the class is devoted to baby safety, making sure that the new grandparents are aware of household hazards to the newborn. And if an emergency like choking should occur, these grandparents are taught the proper infant CPR technique, which is a different process than adult CPR. The world of baby care has changed since these couples were parents. To find out more about those changes, I invited Cathy Akin to our studio. Cathy, in your class, your students, they've all been parents. They have been successful at raising their children. Certainly they have the experience and the knowledge. So my question is, doesn't that success and experience being a parent translate into being a grandparent?
You know, new parents want their parents to understand the changes that have been happening. So they want them to have the knowledge that they're researching because they have everything at their fingertips. And they get all this knowledge ahead of time, where us as grandparents of, well, this is the way we used to do it.
20 or 30 years ago, yeah.
Yes.
Well, you're talking about the differences. What has changed in that 20 or 30 years about parenting that grandparents need to know about?
Safety is a big thing that's changed. You know, how the baby sleeps, where the baby rides in a car, you know, how you're going to feed them, how you're going to care for them. Not that it's really changed, it's just we can do better.
Well, you pointed out when we were talking earlier the fact riding in a car. I mean, you took your first child home not in a car seat at all.
Not in a car seat, in a little carrier, and we had them in the front seat with us, sitting in my lap. So now you don't do that. We have laws that tell us where the child is supposed to be up to 4'9" or 40 pounds.
With your students, do they communicate to you the issues and concerns they have about being expectant grandparents?
I think their question is just the fearful. They don't want anything to happen when they're in care of the child, and so many of them are going to be caregivers, for their grandbabies. So they want to know the things they need to know. Of course, all the things that kids have, the different things you can go and buy and purchase on Amazon are just a plethora of things, and they don't know anything about how these things work, from a bouncer to this thing that's called a rock and play, and all these things that are different, because we didn't have those. So that they want to know about all those things. They want to know about feeding, and because that's a big push we have with breastfeeding now. And a lot of them didn't breastfeed or didn't know about pumping, and then how they can still be actively involved.
In doing research on this segment, I ran across an AARP article, and it had 5 don'ts, 5 things that you should not do as a new grandparent. So let me go through these and just get your comments. Number 1 is, don't tell your kids how to raise their children.
Well, they're not going to listen because I think this generation, they've got their own set ways. So there's no need telling them, oh, you're not doing this right, because they're going to tell you, if you want to see your grandchild, you're going to do it the way I'm raising them. And so, yes, that's a no-no. I would not do that.
Number 2 is, don't forget how to say no. So, in other words, don't be afraid to say no when they call up at the last minute and say, we need a babysitter.
You never want to say no to your kids. You don't want to, but sometimes you've got to because of your own life that you have, your own commitments, and so they may not take it pleasantly because a lot of times I think some young people might take advantage of the grandparents, especially if they live close.
Number 3 is don't compete, meaning don't compete, the spouses compete, or competing with the other set of grandparents.
And I haven't really seen the examples of competing with the couples themselves, but between grandparents, typically the grandmothers, about the time one might get to spend, because sometimes I think you do see a connection between the mom who's had the baby versus if it's her son-in-law, and they kind of feel like there's competition about, well, she gets more time than me. And you know, and I think that's just a motherly instinct that you have sometimes because you've got that bond because that's your daughter that's had the baby versus your son. But I see that competition, and it can go as far as buying things, trying to bribe, I'm going to take you to dinner, you know, things like that. So
yeah, well, the point is, it's not a competition.
It's not a competition.
There's no trophy awarded for being the best grandparent.
Probably the parents are happy about some of it, but it can turn into a battle and cause conflict between a marriage.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because actually number 4, I think, could lead to conflict. Number 4 is don't disregard parental rules.
Even when you're taking care of them, you got to listen to the rules they have, even if you may object or disagree with how their parenting may be, from what they're letting them eat to how they're letting them sleep, or, you know, not picking them up when they cry. You know, there's all kinds of things. So yeah, there's all kinds of stipulations that you have to look at.
Well, how do you deal with that kind of conflict, which is inevitable? Because I would think grandparents, as you said earlier, they said, I did this 20 or 30 years ago. It was good enough for me. It should be good enough for you. How do you communicate to them how to pass along their knowledge in a positive way?
Well, I think still sharing, you know, just because they may not be always listening to what I'm saying, I think they did parent, they did a good job because they've got them. So I think it's a good idea to still share the information, especially when you can see whatever they're doing may not be perfect. And I think they may listen to what your knowledge that you have, you know, so I think that's important to still share it, even though they may not like it. You know, that we'd be failing as grandparents or as parents not to share the information we have.
The last one, number 5, is don't be too pushy. I guess don't just show up at the door and say, I want to see my grandson or granddaughter.
I think a lot of the parents that we have now, they set rules early on. Now, if you live in close proximity, you know, I think that some grandparents do take advantage of that, and we can see that in a positive way if mom is willing to accept what they're there for, if they're not just there to come and take over versus coming to help. Because I think our new parents, I think it's overwhelming, number one, getting a new baby in the home because it's a different generation of used to instant gratification. So I think they welcome that part. But if you're coming over to tell me what I'm doing wrong or what I'm not doing, I think that can push you away. And they may, you know, of course, as a grandparent, I can speak for saying that you don't want to hear, well, you just stay home today. Because you don't want to miss the opportunity of spending time with your grandbaby. But yes, you can be too pushy in what you see is the way you should do things when they're doing it their way.
All right, last question, and that really is your best advice to expectant grandparents.
I think to, you know, don't miss a moment because life is short. You know, take every opportunity when you can. Speaking as a grandparent who has one that lives far away, you know, thank goodness for technology that you can FaceTime, even that, or sending cards so that the grandchildren have, you know, a physical piece of something that shares that. But to grandparents that are in our class, you know, we send them home with, we want to help you to know the basic information of what we know to the best of our knowledge, how to care for the baby, how to care for the mom, and the dad. We don't ever want to forget the dad because he's going through this too, as well as the safety things that have changed so that they can be the best that they can be for their grandchild. So I think that's the important part.
Well, Cathy, thanks for taking the time out to come here
and
tell us
You're
about
welcome.
how to be a grandparent.
Thank you very much for having me.